Hello and welcome to the channel. This is Sam, trying to spin to win on Zwift. Today we're doing the DBR Sunday race on the Sugar Cookie course. Not only should this be a very competitive race, it's also a great opportunity to recon the course that we will do on Tuesday in the Zwift Racing League. As such, I thought it'd be useful, hopefully for you, but in particular for me, to do a race on the course to see what we can learn in advance of our race on Tuesday. Not feeling the best today, been off the bike for a few days. Not sure exactly, I had a slight tickle in my throat. So we'll see how we get on today. But again, it should be a very good race. As usual in my videos, we'll first have a look at the competition. We'll have a quick look at the course before we get into the action. And please use the chapters in the description below to jump around to the bits of today's video that you find interesting. But with that, let's see how we get on today. First, let's have a look at Zwiftpower, and specifically the 20-minute power data. I apologize for the small font here. I took these screenshots like a minute before the start and I forgot to zoom. However, the key takeaway is that there are over 30 riders with a 20-minute watts per kilo of over 4 and a number with 4.3 or higher. I find myself quite far down here in around 25th spot, so it is a very competitive B category field based on this statistic. For 15-minute power, it again indicates this is a very strong field. There are some monster numbers here with 10 riders with higher than 12 watts per kilo, and I find myself in around 20th spot on this metric. So if it comes down to a sprint, I am likely to be in a bit of trouble. Finally, looking at the ZwiftRacingApp information, which I think is the best way to predict the outcome of a race, we again get confirmation that this is a pretty stacked race. I am in 15th place here with a score of 1773, but we can see a number of Ruby riders and even 2 Diamond riders. The second ranked rider, Mikhail, won a race I did about a week ago, so I know he's extremely strong. But I recognize a number of the names on this list as people that have beaten me in prior races, so this race will be very competitive. If I can finish in the top 20, I think that would be a decent result, and a top 10 would be quite good, especially as I'm not feeling 100%. Now let's have a look at today's course, the Sugar Cookie. The Sugar Cookie course itself is around 34 kilometers long with just over 250 meters of elevation, of which the majority comes at the back end of the course. There is a significant lead-in of almost 6 kilometers, which is almost completely flat. So that brings the total length of the course to around 39 kilometers. While it will of course depend on the race, I would expect the competitive category B race to take around 55 minutes or so, give or take a few minutes on either side of that estimate. There are 4 sprints, and while they'll likely not see too much action today, they will certainly be extremely contested in Tuesday's ZRL race. I will comment on each one of these during today's race so you can get a look at them in race conditions. The key point on the course is the climb towards the end, which consists of the beginning part of the epic climb. This is likely where the key separation will take place in today's race and also on Tuesday. Again, I will cover the climb in a bit more detail during today's race footage. Finally, there is a pretty long descent at the end. Now, I'm not expecting much action here today, but this could be an interesting point in the race on Tuesday if somebody decides to try to sneak away in advance of the final sprint. For the final sprint, please keep in mind that it's a bit of an uphill drag, so don't start your sprint too early. You will see from the footage later that I didn't follow my own advice in today's race. There is a really good recon of this course from a ZRL perspective done by Rob, the Swifty Swifter, on the In the Drops website. So if you want more detail, please check that out. I will leave a link in the description below. Okay, let's get today's race underway and see how I do against some pretty tough competition. The start of this race was pretty uneventful. The usual initial swift surge, which always serves as a first selection point, but then it quickly settled down to a more reasonable pace. It wasn't what I term slow, however, as I was doing between 3 and 3.5 watts per kilo for most of the time until the first sprint. For the ZRL race on Tuesday, I am expecting something similar. While the pace and power needed will depend on your specific race and division, I think a relatively spicy start, followed by an even but reasonably hard effort, is likely to be what happens. I wouldn't worry if a rider or two goes away here, especially if they're not on the same team, but if you get a group of 5 to 10 make a break on the descent or start of the flat section thereafter, then perhaps it is time to take notice. Let's now skip forward to the first sprint. The Stoneway sprint comes at 7.8 kilometers and is 400 meters long. There is around a 2% gradient at the start before it levels out in the last 200 meters or so. However, I started rolling the footage a bit before the sprint, as there is a bit of a bump you need to go up just before the sprint starts. It lasts for around 400 meters with around a 3% incline. Now, while nothing happened here in today's race, I wouldn't be surprised if the pace already picks up here on Tuesday, especially as the Stoneway sprint is a first across the line, or FAL, sprint only. The start of the sprint proper is when you pass the largest stone structure on the left. I will let the footage roll on here for the rest of the sprint so you can get a better feel for it. For today's race, the pace did pick up during the sprint and towards the end. As you will see, we're doing up towards 6 watts per kilo in the end, and the field is being strung out a bit. Now, with this sprint being FAL on Tuesday, I think it will be a full-on sprint here. And as mentioned, I think it will start even before on that little lump we just looked at. So I would suggest you prepare yourself for a significant effort here. Even if you're not going for FAL points per se, I still think you need to sprint hard here to make sure you stay in the front group. And you also need to make sure you stay alert after the sprint ends, as some riders or teams may want to kick on there to create a separation. I would expect this will be the fastest sprint of the day on Tuesday, and while it will of course depend on your race, I would suggest you're prepared to go all out here just to stay with the front group. Now let's skip forward to the next sprint. The Acropolis sprint comes pretty soon after the Stoneway sprint. It starts at 10.3 kilometers and lasts for around 450 meters, and there is a very slight incline for most of the sprint. As you will see, nothing much happened here in today's race, but I expect the pace to be significantly higher on Tuesday. It should be noted that this is a fastest through segment or FTS sprint on Tuesday in the ZRL. As such, I expect the pace to increase naturally just because it's a sprint, but not as much as the Stoneway sprint. Some riders will inevitably go for the FTS, and you also need to watch out for a possible push after the sprint. But if you just see a few riders zip past, I wouldn't worry too much about it as long as you stay within the front group. Now let's skip forward to the next sprint. Nothing much happened in our race after the Acropolis sprint. A few riders went off the front, but nothing that the peloton really worried about, and we're all still together as we approach the next sprint. The Sasquatch sprint starts at 16.1 kilometers and lasts for 350 meters with a very slight incline for most of the sprint. This is FAL only sprint on Tuesday in the ZRL. In today's race, nothing happened again in this sprint. In fact, it was very chill. But on Tuesday, again being a FAL sprint, I expect another full-on sprint effort here. My guess is that at this point, riders will start losing the front group as the combined effort of all these sprints start to tell. But if you want to stay in the front group, be prepared for a big effort here, with the possibility that some riders and teams push on after the sprint to again try to get that separation when everybody is tired. I think, however, that effort is a bit more likely on the next sprint, given there's a bit of a bump right after it, but we'll get to that in a second. In fact, since nothing happened in today's race, let's skip forward to that sprint now. The final sprint of the day, apart from the finish of course, is the Woodland sprint. It starts at 20.8 kilometers and lasts for 500 meters. However, since it is a downhill sprint at around 2% gradient, it may not even feel as long as some of the other sprints. It is FAL only on Tuesday in the ZRL. Today's race was again very chill over this sprint, as there was really nothing to sprint for. But we did pick up the pace a bit on the bump that comes right after. However, on Tuesday in the ZRL, this being an FAL sprint, again I expected a significant push here. And unlike the other sprints, I think it is indeed very likely that riders and teams will continue to push to create a separation here, as there is a bit of an incline a couple hundred meters past the sprint, and then it is a bit bumpy all the way to the start of the epic com. So again, I wouldn't be surprised if there is a separation here. So be on the lookout for this if you want to stay in the front group. We have now skipped forward a few kilometers to what I think is referred to as Heartbreak Hill. This is really the last small climb before the start of the epic com, and as you will see from the footage, the pace in today's race actually picked up a bit here, especially towards the end of this small climb. I was trying my very best just to keep a steady power here, as I didn't want to push any more than I had to with the larger climb coming shortly thereafter. Also, there is a bit of a downhill just after Heartbreak Hill, so you may be able to close a small gap here easier than pushing super hard up the hill. For Tuesday, I wouldn't be surprised if there is a significant push here. My advice, not that I'm qualified to give such, is to try to work as little as possible here while still staying with the front group. If a couple of riders go off the front, or even 4 or 5, I wouldn't stress too much, as you really need to save your effort for the epic com. Of course, if the whole peloton pushes, you need to do so also, but again, I wouldn't spend any bullets trying to close down a small break here. Okay, let's move on to the big feature of this sugar cookie course, the first part of the epic com climb. Okay, coming up is the big effort of the day. This is where the separation will happen, and if you do not manage to stay in the front group at the end of this climb, you will most likely not feature for any of the top spots. I know from previous races that this is, for me, around a 4-minute effort, with the possibility of another minute or two of hard work after that, depending on what happens in the race. I think the action from today's race is a very good indication on what will happen on Tuesday. If anything, we may go a bit faster here today than on Tuesday, as we're likely fresher at the start of the climb, but any way you look at it, this is a significant effort. I had already decided that even if I lost the front of the race, I wouldn't panic. As mentioned, this is about a 4-minute effort for me, and I wanted to pace this relatively evenly to make sure I could, if needed, push a bit extra at the end, rather than completely burn out trying to stay with the very front of the race up the first steep part of the climb. I would rather catch riders on the bridge, where there's actually draft available, than trying to keep up at the start. And every time I've raced here, some people just go super hard at the start. Good for you if you can keep that up the whole way, but I know I can't do that, so I need to play to my strengths, which is a pretty decent, steady 5-minute power effort. As the footage rolls on, you will see that what I predicted is exactly what happens. The race strings out almost immediately as the climb starts, and the front goes away from me. However, I keep plugging on, and slowly I start moving up and closing in on the front group. At this point of the climb, if you think I've suffered enough to earn your subscription, please hit the like and subscribe button. I would appreciate that very much. Thank you. As the incline picks up right after the bridge, I put in a bit of a dig to make sure I am in contact with the front group. And while I was tired here, I still had a bit left in the tank just in case. For me, it took almost exactly 4 minutes from the bottom of the climb to where you hang right and leave the epic comb. That was about a 4.5 to 4.7 watts per kilo effort. Now, clearly yours will be different, but hopefully it will give you an indication of the effort needed on Tuesday. Now, if you remember, I mentioned that you may need another minute or two of effort after the climb. From experience, I know that the front group often keeps pushing on the slight downhill after you turn right from the epic comb, and that is exactly what happened in today's race. As you will see from the footage, I actually start losing the front group a bit here. But while tired, I had a bit left in the tank, and I took turns with Mr. Aaargh to bring the front group back. I think we also pulled a few others with us who actually end up featuring in the final sprint. And I hope they send us both nice Christmas cards. After a bit of rest, we then come to the final significant incline in today's race. I think you should approach this in the same way as the Heartbreak hill earlier in the race, in that you really don't want to push hard here unless you have to. Just follow the front group, and if a few riders go off the front, so be it, as you're likely to catch them on the big downhill coming right after. As you will see from the footage, the pace did pick up, as expected on the climb, and I think we did lose a couple of riders from the group here, but nobody went really nuts at the front, and it was a pretty steady effort. There is around 20 of us as we start going downhill towards the finish. I will keep the speed up on the footage here so we can see the downhill section in full, as there are a couple things to mention. First, this is clearly a good time to catch your breath and start preparing for the final sprint. You of course need to pay attention to what the group is doing, but given the steepness of the descent, it should, at least in theory, be pretty hard to go off the front here. However, that is exactly what a rider attempts in today's race. Mr. Zuti, apologies for the pronunciation, starts to pull away and relatively quickly establishes a 10 to 11 second gap. Nobody in the group did anything about it, and I started to think that he was actually going to win the race here. But slowly we start pulling him back, and we're all pretty much together at the final sprint. However, I must say I like this tactic, and I think you may want to consider going a bit later than Mr. Zuti did. But if you can get, say, 5 seconds on the group when the descent ends and keep your speed, I think you may have a good shot at winning the race, as long as your legs are not completely gone at that point. This is perhaps something to consider for Tuesday, especially if you're a somewhat heavier rider, like I am. We'll have to wait and see. Okay, we are now inside the last kilometer, and Mr. Zuti is still a few seconds ahead, and one other rider, Leo, also goes off the front slightly. I'm still wondering at this point whether I should have tried an attack at the last part of the descent, but I then turned my attention to the final sprint. I am pretty tired here, so I know I need to time this correctly to have any chance. And I tried to stay in around third or fourth wheel from the front, but then for whatever reason I put in a dig with around 300 meters to go. No clue why I did that, especially since there's a bit of an uphill drag to this finish. As we catch Mr. Zuti with about 150 meters to go, the others start their final sprint and a bunch speed past me. And I don't have another kick at this point. And I just try to hang on as best as I can and roll over the line in 10th. Another darn mistimed sprint. When will I ever learn? For Tuesday, I will try to fix this, and hopefully you, the viewers, will also learn from my mistake. As I get off the bike and take a rest on the floor, let's have a look at the results and some final thoughts. On Zwiftpower, I came in 10th spot, just under 2 seconds behind the winner, Darren Jones, who put in an impressive sprint at the finish to clinch first place. Jens Aaargh finished second, with Bonnie coming in third place. On the ZwiftRacingApp, we can again see I came in 10th spot. But what I find interesting and useful on this page is to compare the actual position versus the predicted position based on your rating prior to the race. In this case, I should have finished in 15th spot, and I actually gained around 8 points on my rankings from this race. But in general, while not perfect, you can see that the actual versus predicted is not too far off in most cases. Clearly the winner, Darren, was an outlier, but from looking at his racing history on Zwiftpower, he is really a Cat A racer who's coming back from a Swift break over the summer. Now, I have no problems with this, but I do think he will be moved up to Cat A soon, as he is a very strong racer. Okay, time for some final thoughts on today's race before we wrap it up. Okay, as we warm down after that race, a few thoughts. First, 10th position. I'm pretty happy with that, considering, as I mentioned in the beginning of the video, I'm not feeling 100% today. I'm not bad by any stretch, but not tip-top. So 10th position in a tough field, I just can't be disappointed with that. If I hadn't messed up the sprint, I probably could have gotten a few more places, but I certainly wouldn't have been on the podium. The race panned out just the way I thought it would. Unlike Tuesday, it was pretty chill all the way to the climb. Then we climbed pretty hard, and then it chilled again before the final sprint. I must say I'm pretty happy with my effort on the hill. I think I paced myself pretty well. You could see there towards the end, I was actually closing in, making sure I was in the front group. I think if I go too hard at the start, I won't have that at the very end on Tuesday. Although I think on Tuesday, to be fair, I think we'll have a smaller group at the end of the hill. Whether I'll be in there or not, we're gonna have to wait and see. And again, the sprint, I was in a good position, and then I kind of knocked it off for a bit because I realized it was further than I thought. And then I just didn't have it in the very end. But c'est la vie, that's the way it is. Overall, good race, good workout. Bit of a quiet day tomorrow, and then we go super hard on Tuesday, which is going to be one tough race because there's so many good racers in the category B1. Anyway, hope you enjoyed, learned a few things. This is Sam, trying to spin to win, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye.